it's still unclear if things in Ukraine will improve or worsen. That's because, on one hand, the so-called American withdrawal could ease the risk of a conflict for others, Europeans. In desperation and anxiety, they might try to enter Ukraine on their own to avoid being sidelined in their own continent. However, regardless of that, keep in mind the era of wars is coming back. The world is becoming more volatile and dangerous, and that's because of deglobalization, combined with the many crises that are imploding simultaneously. One is the demographic crisis, which I frequently discuss on the channel, and all these crises will happen in the same period of time during the same decades and will drive even more wars. That's why in this video I'm going to tell you what the 6 most likely major military crises will be in the next 25 years. And it's not that I think there will only be 6 major crises, but because from these 6 crises we will have the risk of them spreading, escalating in violence, or leading to other conflicts. Remember, this is not a prophecy, but predictions based on what is happening now. So of course the leaders of these countries, seeing the risks, can act to change these crises, maybe even avoid some of them. But before that, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share the video with everyone you know to support the World Geopolitics channel's growth. It may seem like a small thing, but every time you share the video on other social networks like WhatsApp, Telegram, Instagram, and so on, that boosts the YouTube algorithm to show more content from World Geopolitics. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Telegram to stay up to date with geopolitics news and the channel. I'm Cleon Peterson, and this is World Geopolitics. The first region I see becoming destabilized and causing major problems is the region of Pakistan. With this instability spreading to the surrounding regions, especially to Afghanistan and maybe to India, I've already discussed at length in a video the risks and why this is one of the world's worst and most dangerous crises. The Pakistani government has faced collapse risks since at least 2009. It's not something that recent, but they've been managing to stay on their feet through a lot of struggles, due in part to China, the United States, and even India, their main rival. But despite the rivalry among these 3 countries, China, Pakistan, and the United States, they all recognize that the disruptive potential of a major crisis in Pakistan would further inflame the Middle East, India, and maybe even have effects in Southeast Asia. China, besides needing Pakistan, which is its main ally, and yes, Pakistan is China's main ally, not North Korea as many people think, primarily due to the Belt and Road Initiative and efforts to contain India. This makes the Chinese also understand that instability in China could inflame all the regions around its sensitive areas, from Xinjiang to Tibet. And India, despite its huge rivalries with the Pakistanis, has cooperated with investments in infrastructure and shared intelligence about insurgent groups with the Pakistani government. The problem lies with the Pakistani Taliban, which is unofficially a branch of the famous Afghan Taliban. They lack the strength to take over the country, but have enough power to pull the Pakistani government into a high-friction conflict, which could end up wearing down the Pakistani government machine, which, as I already said, has been walking a tightrope for over a decade. Especially as the Taliban in Afghanistan threatens not only to support the Pakistani group, but even to attack directly. And don't forget the huge amount of weapons and military equipment abandoned by NATO in Afghanistan. And any problem here that causes instability, especially in the government of Afghanistan, will create colossal levels of refugees. China may even be able to control the access of these immigrants into its country due to geography, so they will hardly have many problems. But India won't. It will absorb this mass of people, predominantly Islamic, at a time when religious tensions in India are already running high, which has also threatened the country with instability. This human wave could destabilize or create enormous pressure for the Indians. And if they can't resolve it, they will feel this Islamic instability in their western part. And it will reach the other place, a very complicated one, in their eastern part, near Bangladesh, creating an arc of instability. And it's important to mention that both Pakistan and India have nuclear weapons, which makes this instability even more threatening. This instability in the northern corridor of India is dangerous, especially in the far east of the Indians. We have the border with Myanmar, which has also done everything to expel the Rohingya, a local ethnic group that is also mostly Muslim, which has caused many problems for Myanmar. And it's worth remembering the situation in Myanmar was already serious because of the civil war, and it got even worse now because of the earthquake. Who knows when they will recover from this? So all of South Asia is exposed to a huge risk if tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan increase, which could even spread to parts of Southeast Asia. And even if there isn't this friction between Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban, keep in mind that the region is a pressure cooker that could explode. Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan, for example, is literally a hellish place. A city with no urban planning, with over 1 million people and extremely high unemployment. An absurd water shortage, and because of the excess concrete and buildings without trees, it's a cauldron of heat islands. Parts of the city, where it's more densely populated, easily reach 50 degrees Celsius. And with a water crisis, this, combined with neighborhoods dominated by criminal factions and Islamic extremists with a mostly young male population, it's a disaster recipe. The second region is the Caucasus. All signs point to a larger, heavier Azerbaijani action against Armenia backed by Turkey. This conflict could get much worse. That's because of the risk of more pressure from Azerbaijan, which is a proxy state. In other words, an intermediary, a client state of Turkey. It still remains over Armenia. And it got even worse after the Russians, let's say, kind of abandoned Armenia so as not to upset the Turks. Abandoned Armenia. So it went looking for another partner to be its guarantor, the guarantor of its sovereignty. But no one really wanted to take on that role except for France, which can't do much. But it views with concern the growing Turkish influence in the Eastern Mediterranean. Especially because the region is at the mouth of the area, which is extremely sensitive for Europe due to trade with the Indian and Pacific Oceans. So, Armenia is practically alone now, and sooner or later, everything indicates that the Azeris will move against them to take the rest of the west of the country up to Nagorno-Karabakh, which should take away 1/3 of the already small Armenia. However, it is very likely, quite likely actually, that if this conflict happens after the end of the war in Ukraine, we will see the French and Russians cooperating with the Armenians against the Turks and the Azeris. That seems unlikely, but understand that everyone, literally everyone, is very bothered by the Turks. They are provoking every country they could, and they've managed the feat of getting on everyone's nerves up to this point. After all, they literally had everything in their hands, but everything in geopolitics has an expiration date. And the bill is already coming due. I myself have been saying for a long time that their bill is coming, but so far nothing has happened. However, it will come one day. It's hard to say when, but everything indicates it will be related to the Armenian issue in the next 15 to 20 years. A lot of people might find this rapprochement between the French and Russians unlikely. After all, they went from being rivals to practically enemies today, threatening each other. But understand that this volatile relationship with countries switching alliances, breaking alliances, creating new ones, and then switching again was normal for centuries, especially in the 19th century. Stability today exists mainly because alliances in the 20th and 21st centuries up to 2020 were more stable. But it's not exactly normal. So, don't be surprised by a possible normalization of French and Russian relations, because geopolitical forces will push these two actors to cooperate. The third region is Mexico and the southern United States. That's because, despite the harsh words from Donald Trump, the President of the United States, against the cartels and putting them on the list of terrorist groups, in practice, we're seeing little action. In fact, the situation in Mexico decade after decade has been getting worse, and today we have entire regions of the country outside of state control, with sicarios and crime soldiers better equipped. This even surpasses the Mexican security forces themselves, and I don't mean non-police forces or the army. There is no perception of long-term improvement, which means that the violence will only continue and the flow of drugs into the United States will keep going, probably even increasing. And the reason for this is that the United States is not addressing the root of the problem. It's different from what many people say. Dishonest, isn't it? It's not China that's flooding the United States. It's not Chinese, and this happens all over the world. But only in the United States do we have this epidemic. Besides that, all the security protocols and information exchange requested by the American government from the Chinese government have been met. The real and unpleasant reason is that for decades the United States has encouraged a culture that glorifies crime and promotes excessive drug use. This intensified during the Obama administration and its cultural policy, woke. It's easier to imagine an external, non-existent enemy than to address the country's real internal problems. As long as there isn't a fight against drug consumption and a cultural change, trafficking will penetrate deeper and deeper into American society. And we already know the consequences of that, which is an increase in crime. And by ignoring that the drug problem is themselves, Americans are outsourcing to others the decisions about their own future. In other words, when the wars between the cartels start to erupt inside the United States, with situations where we will see bombings, shootouts, public executions, and everything else that happens in Mexico, Americans will be forced to do something, or they will see their entire southern border begin to erode their territorial integrity. It's impressive that a country with such a powerful military has tens of thousands of soldiers spread all over the world, but practically almost nothing on its own problematic border. So what does it actually mean to do something? Basically, there are two options. Start military operations in Mexico, which is very, very problematic. Or they'll have to drastically change their laws, systematically breaking some human rights and imprisoning users in the same way they do with traffickers. As long as the demand isn't addressed, fighting any supply will be useless. Whether it's the ongoing violence in Mexico, its worsening, or its spread into the United States. The truth is that Americans will be forced to make drastic decisions, and the longer they wait, the worse the situation will get, and the degree of how drastic that action will have to be will only increase. So, either Washington decides on something radical, or the cartels will force them to make a radical decision for them. The fourth region is Brazil, and the problem is more or less similar to that of the United States, only maybe even worse. Because here we don't just have state in action in fighting crime. If only that were the case. It would actually be good if the state just did nothing, because basically it would mean that by changing a few authorities we could already see some positive results, but that's not the case. What we have in Brazil is, besides the state, losing control of more and more territories. We have the state itself encouraging crime in Brazil, with government authority figures from all three branches openly protecting crime. The situation in Rio de Janeiro will likely worsen until only the south zone remains governable. And with other coastal cities around Rio de Janeiro also slipping out of the formal control of the state, the north and northeast are following the same path. The Brazilian north has always been a challenge for central governments, but as the demographic crisis, deglobalization, and economic crises pile up, the region will become ungovernable. In the northeast, Ceará and Bahia are already in extremely serious situations similar to that of Rio de Janeiro, maybe even worse. But incredibly enough, no one is doing anything right to solve crime in Brazil. You say the situation will only get worse, and this will intensify an effect that is already underway, which is the increase in migration caused by violence. The interior of São Paulo, Paraná, and Santa Catarina will see more and more immigrants coming from the north and northeast regions, primarily from São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro's metropolitan regions. The city of São Paulo is no longer so attractive, although it still is relatively, but it will also send its excess population to these regions, both because of the violence and also due to the high financial cost of living in the city. And with that, they either go to the countryside of the state or to Paraná, especially the north of Paraná, and to Santa Catarina. And remember, the São Paulo region is a demographic giant. Any small population fluctuation in this city is enough to completely change entire regions. If 1% of Greater São Paulo's population leaves, it could form a new city in Paraná's interior or overwhelm most cities in São Paulo or Santa Catarina's interior. The first problems will be a sharp rise in living costs, especially real estate prices. After that, water shortages will affect Santa Catarina and northern Paraná. These regions simply do not have the capacity to accommodate many more people. And considering that mayors and city councillors from cities like Londrina, Maringa, Campo Mourão, Criciúma, Blumenau, Lages, and so on. Given the enormous pressure from construction companies to expand the size of the cities, we will see more and more of these regions suffering from water shortages. Maringa, despite promoting itself as Brazil's best city, will see its standard of living decline if it maintains its 2010 to 2022 growth rate. Rapid growth like this always has major social and living standard impacts. So we will see crime increase throughout the country in the coming years, and as a consequence, more poverty caused by crime, which will in turn feed back into crime itself. Of course, this is not set in stone. This is not a prophecy. To be clear, I'm not talking about civil war, separatism, or anything like that, at least not yet. But a crisis that would look more like an internal, institutional, and social breakdown than a traditional war. That doesn't make the scenario any less serious. In fact, it might even make it more concerning because it will be something more long-term, more invisible, and more tied to institutional forces, and therefore harder to fight. The fifth region is Africa, although not all of it, but almost all of it, and I really mean almost all of it, from North Africa all the way to the southern tip of the African continent. And there are several reasons for that. We're discussing water scarcity that will seriously impact Libya, Egypt, Tunisia, Sudan, South Sudan, and others. And we're also talking about religious wars in sub-Saharan Africa, in Nigeria, Togo, Benin, Ghana, Cameroon, and Congo. Food crises persist in sub-Saharan Africa, coup d'etat, and also ethnic and racial wars in several of these countries. But standing out in this sense is South Africa, which by all indications, sooner or later will unleash a season of hunting white South Africans. They might fight back and maybe even get international support from a few countries. I wouldn't doubt support from Russians, Israelis, and even Americans. But the whole African scenario is one of great vulnerability. The global demographic crisis and deglobalization will hit the African continent greatly. The continent has always been hostile to large human groups. In the second half of the 20th century, as they integrated into the global supply chain, they began to change that. It's still a very poor continent, but this poor is much less poor than it was in the past. Even with all the difficulties they have today, which are indeed enormous, they are still smaller than they were before globalization. So with the breakdown of this interconnectedness, most African countries won't be able to deal with their own populations. This will trigger mass migration and worsen the crises I mentioned earlier. A few countries might have better chances, like Ethiopia and that's a big maybe, Angola. But the entire continent will face huge problems. This absurd recent increase in chocolate prices is related to the water crisis and a plague that is affecting cocoa production. It's a sign of what's coming ahead. Soon it will affect other food sources and will make you more dependent on external supply. In this moment of deglobalization, the sixth and last one isn't that surprising, but it's Syria, with the risk of the conflict spreading to Iraq. I think it's the only region where most analysts would agree with me. Syria is far from stabilizing, as the European media has been saying. Israel is now cooperating with Russia to contain Turkish influence. Iran for now is in retreat in the region, but eventually it will reorganize to operate there again. So all of Syria will remain a site for localized clashes. The problem is that this has a huge potential to affect Iraq, with luck only the north of Iraq. It's likely to affect the whole country, which already has a very weak government. Depending on how the situation escalates here, combined with other global problems, especially what happens there in the Caucasus, we could see this starting to spread into the Turkish interior and to the west of Iran. And the chances of that happening aren't so small because both countries are already feeling the effects of the demographic crisis. In Turkey, demographics show that Turks may comprise just half the population. So we will have a very big and very profound change in Turkey. Combined with instability in Syria and Iraq, plus competition with Israel and Russia, could this finally wear down the Turks? Ironically, I don't include any of these traditional regions, which many analysts claim are inevitable. A war such as North Korea versus South Korea, Russia versus the Baltics, or a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Despite everything, I think these regions are less likely to have any major internal crisis or even a war, precisely because of the risk that keeps the countries involved on alert and as a result more attentive and proactive during crises. Besides, the Southeast and East Asian region, unless there is some surprise, will be a stable region without major fluctuations or surprises, even with the demographic crisis. And because of that, they will very likely become the new global economic hub. And the Arabian Peninsula, which until recently I viewed with great concern, now I think differently. Despite the extreme internal vulnerability and exposure to global risks, especially Saudi Arabia itself, which is the largest country on the Arabian Peninsula, has managed, even with great success, to maneuver the... This is due to a great pragmatism in foreign relations, whether in an apparent heavy surveillance of internal problems. I doubt Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, or the United Arab Emirates will face significant issues soon. Besides that, they have adopted very efficient reforms that could make the region prosper even more in the future, perhaps even becoming one of the global economic hubs. So for now, I don't see any major threat. In such a volatile world, everything can change week to week. Thank you all, I hope you enjoyed it, and a special thanks to the super members Lucas Silva de Souza and As Portas da Cidade. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share the video with everyone you know. This really helps the channel stay alive. Hugs and see you in the next video. Bye bye.